It was a quiet evening in Atlanta. The sun had just gone down, leaving behind a soft orange glow over the streets. Officer Mark Hayes sat in his police car parked near a corner store sipping cold coffee. He was tired. It had been a long shift, filled with noise, complaints, and tension. Mark had been on the force for 10 years. Once he had joined the police with a dream, to protect people, to make a difference. But years of stress, anger, and fear had made him hard. He started to see people not as individuals but as problems to control. Somewhere along the way, his heart had grown distant. Across the city, Nurse Alicia Brown was finishing her long hospital shift. She had worked through the night and most of the day. The hospital's emergency ward was always busy. Accidents, heart attacks, emergencies that never seemed to end. Alicia was one of those nurses who stayed calm no matter how bad things got. She had comforted crying families, held hands of frightened patients, and smiled through exhaustion. Her co-workers often said she had a healing presence, but now as she clocked out, all she wanted was rest. She still wore her light blue nurse uniform and her hospital ID badge with her photo clipped near her chest. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she carried a small bag with her stethoscope and leftover food from the hospital cafeteria. She was proud of her work, proud of the difference she made every day. On her way home, Alicia stopped at a small convenience store to buy a bottle of water and a snack. The air outside was warm and quiet. She parked her car under a streetlight and walked toward the store, humming softly to herself. She didn't know that, at the same moment, a radio call was coming through the police channel in Mark's car. "All units be advised," the dispatcher said. "We have a report of a female suspect involved in a robbery near Pinewood Street. Black female wearing dark clothing, last seen heading east." Mark straightened up. His tired eyes suddenly lit up with alertness. The address wasn't far from where he was parked. Without taking a moment to think, he started his engine and drove in the direction of the store. His heart raced as his training took over. The streets were mostly empty except for one figure walking out of the convenience store. A woman in a dark jacket holding a small bag. That must be her, he thought. His instincts, or what he believed were instincts, took over his judgment. He parked quickly, jumped out of the car, and shouted, "Stop right there!" Alicia turned, startled. For a moment, she didn't understand what was happening. She blinked under the bright streetlight, confused by the sudden shouting. "Excuse me?" she said softly, raising her free hand. But before she could explain, Mark approached quickly, his hand on his baton. "Put your hands where I can see them," he barked. His tone was sharp and his face was tight with stress. Alicia, scared and unsure, raised both hands. "Officer, I think there's a mistake," she said calmly. "I'm just coming from work." "I'm a nurse," but Mark wasn't listening. His mind was racing with the radio call and the image of the supposed suspect. Every movement she made seemed suspicious to him. Her dark clothes, her nervous expression, he thought they matched the description perfectly. He grabbed her arm roughly and turned her toward the car. "Please, you're hurting me," she cried out, trying not to panic. Her hospital bag slipped from her shoulder and fell onto the ground. The noise startled Mark, and in that tense moment he swung his baton down toward her arm, trying to control her movement. Alicia gasped in pain and dropped to one knee. The contents of her bag spilled across the pavement. Her stethoscope, her ID card, her phone, and a few hospital papers. The small white card with her photo and the words "Mercy General Hospital" glimmered under the light. Mark froze. For a second, everything went silent. The sound of cars, crickets, and the city faded. He slowly bent down and picked up the ID card. The photo showed a smiling woman in a nurse's uniform, the same woman standing before him, now trembling and holding her arm in pain. He blinked in disbelief, reading her name aloud. Alicia Brown, registered nurse. His heart sank. The truth hit him like a heavy weight. She wasn't a suspect. She was a nurse, an innocent woman coming home from work. Alicia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I told you," she whispered. "I'm a nurse." Her voice was soft but filled with hurt. Mark's hands shook. "Ma'am, I made a mistake," he stammered. But his words sounded weak, useless. The damage had already been done. The store owner, who had seen everything from the window, rushed outside. "Hey, officer!" "She's here all the time. She's not a thief," he shouted angrily. Mark didn't respond. His mind replayed the moment again and again, the shout, the strike, the fall. His heart pounded in guilt and confusion. He had reacted without thought, without reason. He realized that he hadn't seen a person that night. He had seen only what his bias wanted to see. Another patrol car arrived after hearing his call. 2 officers stepped out, looking at the scene in confusion. "What's going on, Hayes?" one of them asked. But Mark couldn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the ID card in his hand. Alicia's arm was red and sore, but she tried to stay calm. "Please, I just want to go home," she said quietly. Her voice broke slightly. One of the other officers helped her pick up her things. The stethoscope, the phone, the ID, small symbols of a life dedicated to helping others. The irony was painful. The person who saved lives had just been hurt by someone sworn to protect them. Mark finally stepped back, his voice shaking. I'm so sorry," he said, but she didn't look at him. She got into her car slowly, still shaking, and drove away. That night, Mark sat alone in his patrol car long after his shift ended. He couldn't forget her face, the fear, the shock, the disappointment. He thought about how easily it happened, how quickly judgment had replaced reason. For the first time in years, he questioned himself deeply. In the hospital parking lot, Alicia sat in her car too, holding her arm and taking deep breaths. She wasn't angry, she was heartbroken. She had spent her life healing people, no matter who they were, and now she wondered how the world could still be so blind. As the night stretched on, both of them sat in silence, 2 people on opposite sides of a painful moment. One carried guilt, the other carried pain. But both, in their own way, were changed forever. That night would not just be a mistake written in a report. It would be a lesson written in hearts about how easily prejudice can hurt the innocent and how hard it is to undo the damage once done. Mark didn't sleep. The next morning, he called his superior officer himself and reported everything that happened. He didn't try to hide or defend his actions. "I need to make this right," he said quietly. It was the first honest thing he had said in years. Somewhere across town, Alicia arrived at the hospital again. Her arm still hurt, but she smiled as she entered the ward. The patients greeted her warmly. Despite everything, she still chose to heal. Because that's who she was. A nurse with a strong heart. A woman who believed that kindness should not depend on the color of one's skin. And though she didn't know it yet, her story was about to travel far beyond that night. It would remind people that behind every uniform, behind every skin color, there is a human being. Someone who deserves to be seen, understood, and respected. Alicia stood frozen beside her car, the streetlight above flickering softly. Her heart pounded so loudly she could almost hear it echoing in her ears. Her arm ached where the officer had struck her, but more than the pain, it was the shock that made her tremble. Moments ago, she had finished a long day saving lives, and now she was being treated like a criminal. She tried to breathe slowly, telling herself not to cry. Officer Mark Hayes stood a few steps away, his baton still in his hand, his mind spinning in disbelief. He couldn't take his eyes off the nurse's ID lying on the ground. He had made a terrible mistake, one he couldn't erase. The street that had felt silent a few minutes ago now felt heavy with guilt. Mark's partner, Officer Daniels, arrived moments later after hearing the call on the radio. He looked from Alicia to Mark and back again, confusion written all over his face. "What happened here?" Daniels asked. Mark didn't answer. His throat felt dry. He slowly bent down, picked up Alicia's ID, and handed it to his partner. "She's not the suspect," he said in a low voice. "She's a nurse." Daniels frowned, glancing at the bruised woman who stood clutching her arm. "You sure?" he whispered. Mark nodded, unable to look her in the eyes. "Yeah, I'm sure." The store owner, an older man who had seen the entire scene, came running toward them. "Officer!" "This woman comes here all the time," he said angrily. "She buys water, sometimes snacks after her shifts." "She's no thief!" "You made a mistake." Alicia stood silently, her eyes wet but calm. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She just said softly, "I told him I was a nurse." Mark finally found the courage to speak, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I was responding to a call." "I thought," she interrupted gently, "you thought I was a criminal because of how I look?" The words hit him harder than any blow could. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Deep inside, he knew she was right. He had reacted out of fear, not reason. He had seen her through the wrong lens, the lens of his own bias and fatigue. Daniel stepped forward awkwardly, trying to calm the situation. "Ma'am, please let us take you to get your arm checked." "We can file a report," Alicia shook her head. "I work at Mercy General Hospital. I'll take care of it." Her tone was controlled, but her voice carried quiet pain. She bent down to pick up her things, the stethoscope, the papers, her phone, and carefully placed them back into her bag. Mark wanted to help her, but he didn't move. His hands trembled slightly. People had started gathering nearby. Someone had taken out their phone and was recording. The flashing red and blue lights of the police car reflected on their faces. Whispered voices filled the air. Words like nurse, mistake, and unbelievable. Alicia felt their eyes on her, but she didn't want to be the center of a scene. She just wanted to go home. She straightened up and said quietly, "I have patients tomorrow morning. I need to rest." Mark took a deep breath. "Ma'am, please. I'll drive you home. Let me—" She looked at him, her eyes full of sadness rather than anger. "You've done enough, officer." Her words were soft but powerful. She turned toward her car, opened the door slowly, and sat down. Mark wanted to say something, anything, to make it right. But there was nothing he could say. Words couldn't erase what she had just gone through. As she started her car, Mark stood still, staring at his reflection in the window. For the first time in years, he didn't see a confident police officer. He saw a man who had lost his way, someone who had forgotten the reason he wore the badge in the first place. When Alicia drove away, the flashing lights faded behind her, but the moment stayed sharp in her mind. Her arm throbbed with pain. Yet what hurt more was the feeling of being unseen, of being judged in seconds, without anyone knowing who she was or what she stood for. The next morning, Alicia sat at her kitchen table, holding an ice pack to her arm. The bruise had darkened overnight. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Co-workers, friends, even strangers who had seen the video online. The story was spreading quickly. Someone had uploaded the recording with the caption, "Nurse attacked after shift by officer who mistook her for a suspect." At first, Alicia didn't want the attention. She didn't want pity or headlines. She only wanted understanding, for people to know how painful such moments could be, not just for her, but for anyone judged unfairly. She sighed deeply and whispered to herself, "Maybe something good can still come from this." Meanwhile, at the police station, Mark sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the metal door. The captain had called him in earlier that morning. There had already been complaints, and reporters were calling the department. "Hayes," the captain said sternly, "you need to turn in your weapon and badge for now. Internal review starts today." Mark didn't argue. He just nodded. The captain's tone softened slightly as he added, "You made a serious mistake. The whole city's talking about it." When Mark left the office, he walked slowly to his car. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing ever made him feel this kind of fear of facing himself. Every sound, every image from that night replayed in his mind. The cry, the ID card, the words, "You thought I was a criminal because of how I look." He drove without thinking, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Eventually, he found himself parked outside Mercy General Hospital, the same hospital printed on the nurse's ID. Through the glass doors, he could see people in scrubs walking around, helping patients, carrying files. Life continued inside as usual. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes before finally stepping out. He walked inside quietly, holding his hat in his hands. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Nurse Alicia Brown," he said softly. The receptionist frowned slightly. "She's in the ER section, but she's busy." He nodded. "I'll wait." When Alicia finally came out from one of the rooms, still in her uniform, she stopped in surprise. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. "Officer Hayes," she said calmly. "Why are you here?" He looked at the floor. "To apologize. Not because someone told me to, but because I can't stop thinking about what I did." For a long moment, she said nothing. The hallway buzzed with hospital sounds, machines beeping, footsteps echoing, voices calling out. Finally, she spoke. "You know, I've seen people at their worst here. But even then, we treat everyone the same. That's what being human means." Her words felt like a mirror reflecting everything he had forgotten. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "But I promise you this, I'll never forget what I did. And I'll never let it happen again." Alicia looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slightly. "Change starts when you admit you were wrong. Maybe that's the first step." He nodded too, unable to hold back the emotion rising in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered before turning to leave. As he walked out of the hospital, the sunlight hit his face. It felt warm, warmer than it had in a long time. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The review board, the public judgment, the weight of guilt, all of it would follow him. But somewhere deep inside, a small part of him felt that maybe, just maybe, something inside him had started to change. That evening, as Alicia sat by her window watching the sunset, she thought about what had happened. She could still feel the pain in her arm, but her heart felt lighter. She didn't know if the officer would truly change, but she hoped he would. Because forgiveness, she believed, wasn't about forgetting. It was about teaching someone to see differently. And perhaps that night, for both of them, had been the beginning of seeing the world, and each other, in a new way. The next morning, the whole city was talking about what happened outside that small store. The video of the scene had spread everywhere on phones, news channels, and social media. People were shocked to see a nurse, a woman who spent her life helping others, being hurt for no reason. Some called it unfair, others called it eye-opening. But for two people, it was more than just a headline. It was something that had changed their hearts forever. Officer Mark Hayes sat at his kitchen table staring at the news on his phone. His name was everywhere. The words, "Officer attacks nurse by mistake," scrolled across the screen. His chest felt tight. Every comment, every angry message felt like a heavy stone pressing on his heart. He didn't even try to defend himself.
He knew what he did was wrong.
It wasn't about the news or what people were saying. It was about the truth that he now had to face within himself. His wife, Sarah, placed a cup of coffee in front of him. She had been quiet all morning, watching her husband sit in silence. "You should eat something," she said softly. He didn't look up. "I don't think I can," he said. "I don't even know how to look at myself right now." Sarah sat down across from him. "You made a mistake," she said carefully. "A big one. But if you truly regret it, you have to do more than just feel sorry. You have to make it right somehow." Mark nodded slowly. "I know, but how do you fix something like that?" His voice broke a little. "I hurt someone innocent. I embarrassed my badge, my department, myself." Sarah reached across the table and held his hand. "Start with honesty," she said. "Tell the truth. Don't hide behind excuses." Later that day, Mark went to the police station. His uniform felt heavier than ever. His captain called him into the office. "Hayes," the captain said, "you're on temporary suspension. Internal Affairs will look into the case." Mark nodded. "I understand, sir." The captain studied him for a moment and then sighed. "You've been a good officer for years. But last night, that wasn't good police work. That was something else. You need to think about who you want to be after this." Mark left the office feeling empty. He walked through the locker room, hearing other officers whisper quietly. Some felt sorry for him. Others were disappointed. But he didn't blame anyone. He knew they were right to talk. Meanwhile, across town, Alicia returned to her hospital shift. Her arm still hurt when she moved it, but she refused to take a day off. The hospital was short-staffed and her patients needed her. When she walked through the emergency ward, her coworkers gathered around her. "Are you okay, Alicia?" one of them asked. "We saw the video." "That was terrible." Alicia smiled faintly. "I'm okay. It could have been worse." Another nurse shook her head. "You were calm even in that moment." "I don't know how you did it." Alicia looked down. "I was scared," she admitted. "But fear doesn't help anyone. I just wanted to survive and go home." Throughout the day, people came up to her. Doctors, janitors, even patients offering kind words. But despite their support, she felt uneasy. Every time she looked at her bruised arm, she thought about the officer's face after realizing his mistake. There had been real regret in his eyes. That image stayed with her. Later that evening, when her shift ended, Alicia sat on a bench outside the hospital watching the sunset. The city lights were slowly coming on, and a gentle wind brushed against her face. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Why do people judge before they see the truth?" Just then her phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital administrator. "A reporter wants to speak with you for an interview. It's your choice." At first she didn't want to. She wasn't looking for attention. But then she thought about all the people who might face something similar. People who didn't have a voice, people who were judged without being known. She decided to speak not for herself but for them. The next day, a local news reporter visited her at the hospital. They sat in a quiet room with cameras and microphones. The reporter asked gently, Alicia, how did you feel when it happened? She paused before answering. I felt small, she said softly. I felt invisible. I kept telling him who I was, but he didn't see me. He only saw what he wanted to see. The reporter leaned forward. Do you hate him? Alicia looked thoughtful. No, she said. Hate doesn't heal anything. I just want people to learn from this. I want officers and everyone to remember that behind every face, every skin color, there's a story, a life, a family. We're all human. The interview aired that night, and it touched hearts everywhere. People were moved by her calmness, her grace, and her strength. Messages of support poured in for her, and even police officers from other cities reached out to thank her for handling it with dignity. Mark saw the interview too. He sat on the couch, staring at the screen, listening to her voice. Every word she said felt like a lesson meant for him. He whispered quietly, "She's right." He turned off the TV and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked out the door. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he needed to face her again. When he arrived at Mercy General, the evening shift was ending. Nurses were walking out, chatting and laughing, their white uniforms glowing under the lights. Mark stood outside the hospital door, waiting nervously. When he saw Alicia coming out, he took a deep breath and approached her slowly. "Ms. Brown," he said softly. Alicia stopped and looked at him. Her expression was calm but guarded. "Officer Hayes," he nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I saw your interview," he said. "You spoke with such kindness. I didn't deserve it. I just wanted to tell you in person, I'm deeply sorry." Alicia looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly. "I could see it in your face that night." He swallowed hard. "I can't change what I did, but I want to do something right. If there's any way to make it better, tell me." She thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe you can start by listening. Listen to people you don't understand. Learn their stories. See them for who they are." He nodded slowly. "I will," he promised. She gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe something good can come from all this." For the first time in days, Mark felt a bit of peace. He extended his hand, unsure if she would take it. After a pause, she did. Her handshake was gentle, yet strong. "Take care, Officer Hayes," she said before walking away toward her car. As he watched her leave, Mark felt something change inside him. The world looked a little different now, clearer, more human. He realized that true strength wasn't about control or authority. It was about humility and understanding. That night, he sat in his car outside his home staring at the stars. He made a promise to himself. He would never again let fear or bias guide his actions. From that day forward, he would work to earn back the meaning of the badge he wore, not just through duty, but through compassion. And somewhere in the city, Alicia smiled as she tucked her stethoscope into her bag for another long shift. She didn't know it yet, but her story was already changing hearts, showing the world that kindness, even after pain, could become the first step toward healing. The sun rose quietly over Atlanta, painting the city with soft golden light. Inside the hospital, Nurse Alicia Brown was already on her feet, checking patient charts and adjusting IV lines. Her arm still ached slightly, but she ignored it. Helping people made her forget her own pain, yet deep in her heart, the memory of that night still lived. The sound of the officer shouting, the shock, and then the realization in his eyes when he saw who she was. It had been days, but she could still feel it as clearly as if it had happened just an hour ago. Across town, Officer Mark Hayes sat in the police department waiting room. His badge and gun had been taken temporarily while the investigation continued. He had come to meet the review board, but what weighed on him more was the thought of facing Alicia again. Every day since that night, he replayed the scene over and over. He remembered her calm voice, the quiet strength in her words, and the way she didn't fight back or scream. That silence had spoken louder than anything he had ever heard. When his name was called, he stood and entered the small meeting room. 3 senior officers sat behind a long table. One of them, Captain Lewis, looked up from the papers. "Officer Hayes, the video has been reviewed and we've spoken to witnesses," he said in a measured voice. "You made an error in judgment that could have cost someone their life. Do you understand the seriousness of that?" Mark nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." Captain Lewis leaned forward. "We've seen your record. You've served for 10 years, no complaints before this. So tell us, what happened that night? Mark hesitated, then spoke with honesty. I stopped seeing people for who they were. I saw a call, a description, and I reacted. I didn't take a moment to look deeper. I saw what my fear wanted me to see. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then the captain said quietly, "That's a hard thing to admit." He looked at the others, then back at Mark. "You'll be suspended without pay for now. But if you're serious about changing, we'll give you a chance to join the community program next month. Workshops with civilians, nurses, teachers. Learn to connect again." Mark nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll take it." When he left the building, he didn't feel anger or frustration. He felt relief, a small, quiet step towards something better. That evening, Alicia received a call from the police department's community relations office. "Miss Brown," the voice said kindly, "we're organizing a community healing event. The department would like to apologize publicly for what happened. We understand if you don't want to come, but we wanted to invite you." Alicia hesitated. She didn't care for cameras or attention, but she thought about all the people who had reached out after the story spread. Nurses, young students, and even strangers who said her calmness inspired them. Maybe showing forgiveness publicly could help others too. "I'll come," she said quietly. The event was held in a local community hall a week later. The place was filled with people, citizens, reporters, and officers in uniform. The air felt heavy at first, as if everyone was unsure what to expect. Cameras clicked softly. When Alicia walked in wearing her nurse uniform, people turned their heads. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her eyes gentle but firm. Officer Hayes stood at the other side of the hall, his posture straight yet nervous. He hadn't slept much the night before. He had written down what he wanted to say a dozen times, but every version felt too small compared to the hurt he had caused. The moderator introduced them, then said, "Today is not about blame. It's about understanding." Mark stepped forward first. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand. He took a deep breath. "My name is Officer Mark Hayes. A few nights ago, I made a terrible mistake. I acted without thinking. I hurt someone who did nothing wrong. That moment has changed my life. I saw fear when there was none, and I forgot what it means to protect." He paused, his voice growing softer. "To Nurse Brown, I am deeply sorry. I can never undo what I did, but I promise I'll never stop trying to learn from it." The room was silent. Then Alicia stepped up beside him. She didn't have any paper or notes. She just spoke from her heart. "I am Nurse Alicia Brown. I was scared that night, but what scared me most wasn't the pain. It was realizing how quickly we can stop seeing each other as people. I don't hate Officer Hayes. I don't want anyone to hate. What I want is for us to understand that behind every uniform, every color, there's a human being. We need more seeing, less assuming." Her words touched everyone. People nodded, some even wiped away tears. The tension in the room slowly melted into understanding. After the event, Mark approached her quietly. "Thank you," he said. "You could have destroyed me with one word, but instead you taught me something." She smiled softly. "Maybe that's what the world needs more of. Less destruction, more lessons." From that day on, something began to change. Mark joined the community outreach program. He started visiting schools, hospitals, and churches, sharing his story. At first, people looked at him with doubt, but as he spoke with honesty, they began to listen. "I failed once," he would say, "but failure taught me to open my eyes." One afternoon, he was invited to speak at Mercy General Hospital, Alicia's workplace. He stood at the front of the staff room, surrounded by nurses in white uniforms. When he saw her at the back of the room, he smiled nervously. "A few months ago," he began, "I met someone who changed how I see the world. She reminded me that kindness is stronger than fear." When he finished, the audience clapped softly. Alicia walked up to him afterward. "You did well," she said with a kind smile. "I learned from the best teacher," he replied. Weeks later, a journalist wrote an article titled, "From Anger to Understanding: The Story That Changed Atlanta." It told how a single night of pain turned into a movement for empathy between law enforcement and the community. Pictures from the event spread across social media. One photo showed Alicia and Mark standing side by side, smiling, holding a banner that read, "Forgiveness is stronger than hate." The image became a symbol of hope for many. Students wrote essays about it. Churches discussed it during sermons. and even police departments from other cities used it in training sessions. At home, Alicia often received letters, some from nurses thanking her for her courage, others from young people saying she gave them hope. She kept them all in a box by her bed. Every time she felt tired or sad, she would open it and read a few lines. It reminded her that something good had come from something painful. Mark also kept something, the original printout of her hospital ID photo, the one that had fallen that night. He framed it and placed it on his desk. It reminded him every day to pause to see people as they truly are. One quiet evening months later, Alicia and Mark met again at a small charity dinner. They both laughed softly when they saw each other. "Seems like we keep crossing paths," she said. He smiled. "Maybe that's how life works when you're meant to make things better together." They talked about their new projects. She was starting a program to help nurses manage emotional stress, and he was leading community discussions between officers and civilians. Before leaving, Alicia said something that stayed with him forever.
"The night you hurt me could have been the end of my faith in people."
"But your apology kept it alive. That's what healing is. Not forgetting, but rebuilding trust." Mark nodded slowly. "And you gave me back my purpose," he said. As they walked out into the cool night air, they both looked up at the stars. The city still had problems, still had people who judged and misunderstood. But now, at least for them, there was proof that change was possible. Proof that one act of compassion could light a path for others to follow. And as the lights of the city twinkled behind them, two people, once strangers connected by a painful mistake, walked forward not as enemies, but as examples of what humanity could be when forgiveness leads the way. Months passed and the memory of that night slowly began to fade from the headlines, but it never left the hearts of those who lived it. What had started as a painful mistake had turned into something unexpected, a lesson in forgiveness that reached farther than anyone could have imagined. Officer Mark Hayes returned to duty, but not in the same way as before. He no longer rushed into calls with anger or fear. Every time he stepped out of his patrol car, he reminded himself, see the person first. His uniform no longer felt like armor. It felt like a promise to protect with empathy, not suspicion. His first day back was quiet. The same streets, the same city. But he noticed things he had ignored before. A mother walking her child to school, an old man sweeping his shop's front, a nurse getting coffee before her shift. Ordinary moments that told small stories of life. He realized that before he had been too blind to see them. That afternoon, while writing a report in his car, his radio buzzed with a familiar voice. "Unit 5, please respond to a possible accident near Mercy General." The name made his heart skip. It was the same hospital where Alicia worked. Without hesitation, he started the engine and drove there. When he arrived, he saw a small crowd near the entrance. A delivery van had backed into a light pole, and a young man had fallen off his bike trying to avoid it. He was bleeding from his leg. Before the paramedics could reach, someone was already kneeling beside the injured boy, pressing a cloth against the wound. Speaking softly to keep him calm, it was Alicia. She looked up and met his eyes for a second. He saw no fear, no distance, only calm professionalism. "He'll be okay," she said as he approached. "It's not deep. I've called the ER team." Mark crouched beside her. "Let me help," he said quietly. She nodded. Together they lifted the young man onto a stretcher when the paramedics arrived. The boy winced but managed to smile. "Thanks, ma'am." "Thanks, officer." As the ambulance drove away, Mark looked at her and said, "You never stop helping people, do you?" Alicia smiled softly. "It's what I do," he paused. "And I'll keep trying to do the same and the right way this time." That simple exchange, witnessed by a few onlookers, later appeared in a small local article titled, "Nurse and Officer Who Once Stood on Opposite Sides Worked Together to Save a Life." The story touched hearts again, showing that forgiveness was not just a word, it could become action. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Alicia were invited to speak together at schools, community centers, and even police training sessions. The first time they stood on stage together, the hall was filled with people, young cadets, students, and citizens curious to hear their story. Mark began first. "That night," he said slowly, "I thought I was doing my job. But I wasn't. I was doing what fear told me to do. I saw someone's color before I saw their character. I was wrong. And I'm here today because she chose to forgive instead of hate. He turned toward Alicia, who continued the story. When we forgive, it doesn't mean we forget. It means we choose to believe that people can change. I didn't excuse what happened, but I believed that showing compassion could do more good than anger ever could. The crowd listened quietly. Some wiped away tears. Others clapped softly when they finished. That night, many young officers approached them afterward, saying, "You made me think differently about how I see people." After a while, the two became symbols of a small but meaningful change. The police department started a new program called Walk in Their Shoes. Officers were paired with nurses, teachers, and community workers for a week to learn about their lives and struggles. Alicia helped design the hospital portion of the program, while Mark volunteered to lead the police training sessions. One morning, as they walked together through the hospital hallway, Alicia said with a smile, "You realize you've become a teacher now?" Mark chuckled. "I think we both did." They stopped near a window overlooking the city. For a few moments, neither spoke. The sky outside was bright, the city alive with people moving about. People of every kind, all trying to make their way through life. Alicia finally said softly, "Do you ever think about that night?" He nodded, "Every day. But not with guilt anymore, with gratitude. Because it changed me. Because it led to this." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Then maybe it happened so something better could grow from it." Time moved forward. 1 year passed. On the anniversary of that night, the community held a small candlelight gathering in the same area where it all began, the corner store parking lot. It was peaceful now, filled with people holding candles and standing shoulder to shoulder, not in anger but in unity. Mark and Alicia stood together near the front. The store owner, the same man who had shouted in her defense that night, spoke first. "A year ago, this place was full of fear," he said. "Now it's full of light, because people chose understanding instead of division." When it was Alicia's turn, she said, "We can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control what we do afterward. That's where our power is." And when Mark spoke, he said, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever seen." It changed me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that people can grow. The crowd clapped softly. Some cried. The two of them placed a single white rose on the ground, not as a symbol of pain, but of peace. Later that night, as they walked away from the gathering, Alicia looked up at the stars. "You know," she said, "I used to think healing was something that happened only in hospitals, but now I see it everywhere, in words, in kindness, in people learning from mistakes." Mark nodded. "And I used to think protecting meant fighting. Now I know it also means understanding." They stopped at the crosswalk as a car passed, its headlights reflecting softly on the street. "You changed me, Alicia," he said quietly. She smiled gently. "Maybe we changed each other." A few days later, the hospital invited her to a ceremony honoring staff who made a difference in the community. When her name was called, she was surprised to see Mark on stage holding the award. The audience applauded as he handed it to her. "For showing the world that compassion heals more than medicine ever could," he said. She accepted it with tears in her eyes. "For reminding us," she replied, "that even those who fall can rise again." From that day, their friendship grew deeper. They worked together on new projects, free health clinics, neighborhood safety workshops, and talks about empathy. The more they worked, the more people noticed that kindness could be stronger than fear. One afternoon, a young police cadet came up to Mark after a seminar. "Sir," he said, "I joined the force because I want to protect people the way you do now." Mark smiled, humbled. "Then remember one thing," he said. "Protecting people starts with respecting them." In another corner of the hall, a group of nursing students surrounded Alicia. "You made us proud," one said. "You showed us that staying calm can change lives." Alicia smiled. "Never let anger decide your actions. Kindness travels farther than you can imagine." Months later, a photo was hung in both the police department and the hospital lobby. A simple image of the two standing side by side, holding a sign that read, "Forgiveness builds what fear destroys." Every day, people stopped to look at it. Some smiled. Some stood silently, thinking. And maybe in those quiet moments, something gentle stirred in their hearts, a small reminder that understanding, even born from pain, can light the way forward. For Mark, that night would forever be the moment he found his humanity again. For Alicia, It was proof that grace could turn even the darkest moment into hope. And for everyone who heard their story, it became a message that would never fade, that the world changes, one heart at a time when we choose compassion over judgment and forgiveness over hate.